My doppelganger is Demon. It started with a coffee shop. I walked in on a Tuesday morning, craving for caffeine and a moment of quiet before work. The barista looked up as I approached the counter, her face lighting up with a smile. "Back so soon?" she asked. I frowned. "What do you mean?" She laughed lightly, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "You were just here, like 10 minutes ago?" I stared at her, my stomach tightening. "I think you're mistaken. I just got here." Her smile faltered, her brow furrowing. "No, I'm sure it was you. Same jacket, same everything." She trailed off, her eyes flicking over me like she was trying to spot the difference between two identical pictures. I paid for my coffee and left without saying another word, my mind spinning. By the time I reached the office, I'd almost convinced myself she'd just made a mistake. Maybe it had been someone who looked like me. A coincidence, nothing more. But that was only the beginning. A week later, I got a text from my friend Sarah. "Hey, are you okay? You seemed off last night." I blinked at the message, confusion swirling in my chest. "What are you talking about?" I replied. The dots appeared, then disappeared, then reappeared again. Finally, she sent, "At the party. You don't remember? You barely talked to anyone. And when you did, you were weird." I hadn't been at any party. "I wasn't there," I texted back. "You've got the wrong person." Her response came almost immediately. "Don't joke about that. I saw you. I talked to you." My hands were shaking now. "Sarah, I swear to God, it wasn't me." She didn't reply. It got worse after that. People at work avoided me, their smiles forced and tight, their glances fleeting. I overheard whispers, something about how I'd snapped at someone during a meeting, how I'd stormed out of the office the day before, but I hadn't been there. Everywhere I went, there were traces of me. Strangers greeted me with familiarity. Store clerks asked if I was back for more. People I hadn't spoken to in years started blocking me on social media. And the worst part? My own reflection didn't feel like mine anymore. It started subtly. A glance in the bathroom mirror that lingered too long. A shadow in the corner of my eye that shouldn't have been there. The way my reflection's smile didn't always match my own, but one night, I couldn't ignore it. I was brushing my teeth, staring at myself in the mirror, when I froze. My reflection had stopped moving. I dropped the toothbrush, my breath hitching. Slowly, my reflection tilted its head to the side, its lips curling into a smile that was too wide, too sharp. And then it whispered, "I'm waiting." The messages started arriving after that. Notes left on my desk at work. Scraps of paper slipped under my apartment door. "You can't stop me. I know you better than you know yourself. One of us has to go." I didn't know who or what was leaving them, but I knew they weren't empty threats. Everywhere I went, my life was unraveling. My landlord called, furious about noise complaints from my apartment while I'd been at work. My boss pulled me into his office, demanding an explanation for emails I hadn't sent. "You can't keep acting like this," he said, his voice tight with anger. "If you don't get it together, you're gone." I didn't try to argue. What could I say? That someone else was pretending to be me? That I was being stalked by my own shadow? No one would believe me. I finally saw it, him, 2 weeks later. I was walking home late one night, the streets empty and quiet, when I felt it, the sensation of being watched. I turned a corner, and there he was, me. He stood at the end of the street, half hidden in the shadows, but there was no mistaking it. The same face, the same clothes, the same everything, except for the eyes. They glinted in the dim light, too bright, too sharp, like the edge of a blade. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice echoing down the empty street. He didn't answer. He just smiled, that same too wide, too sharp grin, and stepped toward me. I ran. I locked my apartment door behind me, my chest heaving. My reflection stared back at me from the hallway mirror, its face calm and blank. "You can't run forever," it said, its voice low and distorted. "Why are you doing this?" I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "What do you want?" Its expression didn't change. "I'm not doing anything. You are." "What the hell does that mean?" It tilted its head, the grin returning. "You let me in." Images flashed through my mind, half-formed memories I didn't recognize. A seance at a party, a darkened room, a voice whispering my name. I didn't. "You did." The next night, he came to my door. I heard the knock, slow and deliberate, echoing through the apartment. When I looked through the peephole, he was standing there, grinning. "Let me in," he said softly. My hand hovered over the lock, trembling. "If you let me in," he continued, "this ends. You'll never have to see me again. You'll never have to worry. I'll take care of everything." "And if I don't?" I asked. His smile faltered, his eyes darkening. "Then you'll wish you had." I didn't open the door. Instead, I ran to the bathroom, grabbed the mirror off the wall, and smashed it onto the floor. Shards of glass scattered everywhere, but the reflection didn't shatter. It stared up at me from the fragments, its grin still intact. "You can't get rid of me," it whispered. "I'm part of you. You're the one who let me in, and you're the one who will let me out." The lights flickered, and for a moment, the entire room seemed to shift. When the lights came back, he was gone, but the whispers never stopped. "I don't know how much longer I can hold out. One of us has to go, and I'm not sure it'll be him." For a while, I thought he was gone. Weeks passed without strange texts. No cryptic notes, no sightings of him at the edge of my vision. My life wasn't perfect. People at work still avoided me, and Sarah wouldn't return my calls, but at least I could breathe again. Then, one night, I saw him. I was walking home from a grocery store, my bag heavy with supplies, when I felt it, that sensation of being watched. My skin prickled, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I turned a corner, and there he was. He stood under a flickering street lamp, his face hidden in shadow. At first, I thought it was my reflection again, some trick of the light. But when the light flickered back on, his face became clear. It was me. He wasn't smiling this time. His face was blank, but his eyes burned with something dark and hollow, as though they could see straight through me. My breath hitched, and I stumbled backward, dropping the grocery bag. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward, his movement slow but deliberate, his head tilting slightly to the side like a predator sizing up its prey. I turned and ran. I ran harder than I'd ever run in my life, weaving through the streets, my chest burning with every breath. I didn't dare to look back. I didn't need to. I could hear him, the sound of his footsteps, impossibly fast, echoing in the empty streets. My apartment wasn't far, but when I rounded the final corner, I froze. He was already there, standing at the door, his hand resting on the handle. His grin was back, stretched wide across his face, his teeth sharp and glinting in the pale light. How did you?" I stammered, my mind reeling. He tilted his head mockingly. "You let me in once. Why not again?" I backed away, my heart hammering in my chest. My reflection had stopped being a reflection. It was something else now, something faster, smarter, and deadlier. That night, I didn't go home. I wandered the city, my mind racing with questions I couldn't answer. Who or what was he? How long had he been following me? And why did he look exactly like me? I ended up at the library. It was late, nearly closing time, but I needed answers. I scoured the shelves, flipping through books on folklore, mythology, and the occult. Doppelgangers, shadow selves, demons that take on human form. It all felt like pieces of a puzzle I couldn't quite put together. Then I found it. A thin, leather-bound book titled Echoes of the Soul. I flipped to a chapter on doppelgangers, my heart sinking as I read the words. A doppelganger is not merely a copy. It is a manifestation of a person's darkest desires, a reflection of the pieces they hide from the world. Once unleashed, the doppelganger will seek to consume the original, taking their place and living the life they could not. My stomach churned as I stared at the page. It wasn't just a reflection. It wasn't just stalking me. It wanted to be me. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw him, his face, his grin, the way he moved like a puppet with broken strings. By morning, I made a decision. I couldn't run anymore. If I didn't stop him, he would destroy me. So I went home. The door was already unlocked. Inside, the apartment was quiet, the air heavy and stale. Shadows clung to the walls, stretching and shifting unnaturally, and I could feel him there, waiting. "You finally came back," his voice echoed from the darkness. I turned, and he was sitting in my chair, one leg crossed over the other, his grin wide and mocking. "This isn't your home," I said, my voice trembling. His grin widened. "Isn't it? You've been running from it for so long, I figured you didn't want it anymore." I took a step forward, my hands balled into fists. "Why are you doing this?" He tilted his head, as if considering the question. "I told you," he said. "You let me in. You wanted this." "That's not true," I snapped. His eyes flickered, the grin fading. "Isn't it?" He stood, his movement slow and deliberate, and for the first time, I saw what he truly was. His form began to shift, his features twisting and melting. His skin turned dark and cracked, like burnt wood, and his eyes glowed with an unnatural light. He wasn't me. He never had been. He was something else, something older, something worse. "I don't want this," I said, my voice breaking. He laughed, the sound echoing like 100 voices speaking at once. "Oh, but you do. You called me. You needed me." I froze, memories flooding back, fragments of moments I'd tried to forget. The seance at the party, the whispered words, half a joke and half a dare, the voice in the dark, promising me power, freedom. a way out of the life I hated. I never meant for this to happen, I whispered. His grin returned, wider than ever. But it did, and now, you have a choice. He stepped closer, the room growing colder with every step. Give in, he said. Let me take over. You'll be free. No more mistakes, no more failures. Just peace. I backed away, my heart pounding. And if I don't? His eyes narrowed, and the shadows around him seemed to pulse, reaching toward me. I'll take it from you, the doppelganger said, its voice cold and unrelenting. The shadows around him pulsed, reaching out like tendrils, tightening the space between us. But I didn't back away this time. You can't take what doesn't belong to you, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. The doppelganger tilted its head, its grin faltering for the first time. Oh? You think you still have control? Look around. The room was dissolving into darkness, the edges of my apartment fading away like smoke. It wasn't just my home anymore. It was his domain. You don't belong here, I said, stepping forward. You're nothing but a parasite, a copy. You're not real. His grin twisted into a snarl, his eyes blazing. You let me in. You brought me here. You needed me. Your failures, your anger, your weakness. I am you. No, I said, meeting his gaze. You're not me. You're my mistakes, my fears, my darkness. But you're not me. The shadows hesitated, wavering around us. I took another step forward, my pulse pounding in my ears. You can only survive if I let you, I said, my voice growing stronger. And I'm done letting you control me. The doppelganger's form began to flicker, its edges blurring and distorting. It lunged at me, its hands clawing for my throat, but I didn't flinch. You don't belong here, I repeated, my voice ringing out like a command. The doppelganger froze mid-step, its body trembling. The shadows around it pulled back, collapsing inward, as if they were being sucked into a void. No, it hissed, its voice cracking with desperation. You can't get rid of me. You need me. I don't, I said, the truth ringing in my chest. Not anymore. The grin fell from its face, replaced by something almost like fear. Its form crumbled, breaking apart like ash caught in the wind. The room brightened as the darkness retreated, and with one final, guttural scream, the doppelganger vanished. Silence filled the apartment. I stood there for a long moment, staring at the spot where it had stood, waiting for it to return. But it didn't. The shadows were gone. The air was still. For the first time in weeks, I felt free. The next morning, I woke up to sunlight streaming through my window. It felt unreal, like I'd been living in a nightmare for so long that I'd forgotten what peace felt like. At work, people stopped avoiding me. Sarah texted me back, apologizing for how things had been, and we made plans to meet for coffee. My life wasn't perfect, but it was mine again. And yet, sometimes, I still catch myself glancing at mirrors for a second too long. I'll see my reflection, my real reflection, staring back at me. But there's always a part of me that wonders, what if it's still out there, waiting for me to slip up? For now, though, it's gone. And as long as I remember who I am, it's never coming back. Well, that was pretty much it. I hope you liked the story till then. Bye-bye.